Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Winged humanoid observed in Fayette County, West Virginia. Hi Lon, hope things are going well. I read about the winged humanoid in your latest newsletter. I've been following these stories in your newsletter pretty closely. The newsletter that was in my inbox today really struck me, because I have seen something similar. The Jeepers Creepers description was dead on. Long story short, I don't remember the exact year, but this would have been the mid-80s. My best guess is 1985 or 1986. It was a summer evening in Oak Hill, West Virginia. Oak Hill is a small town in the south-central part of the state, about 15 minutes from Beckley, West Virginia, or about 1 hour from Charleston, West Virginia. I was between 7 and 8 years old at the time, and I was outside playing with my brother, 1 year younger than me, and our neighbor, a boy named Roy who was the same age as my brother, give or take a few months. We lived in a very rural area which, at that time, we probably had 3 or 4 neighbors within a 1-mile radius, and we effectively lived on the edge of the woods down a dirt road, probably half a mile from a real road. So there weren't many people around. It was dusk and we were throwing rocks to bats. Today, it seems strange, but back then it was something kids in the area did. Bats are common in the area, and around dusk in the summer they are out in force to catch bugs. You'll see dozens of them, and they usually fly approximately 40 feet off the ground or less. If you throw a small rock high in the air, you can often get the bat to swoop down and catch your rock, presumably thinking it's a bug. It's interesting the things kids did before there was the internet, and we only had ABC and PBS on the TV back then, so this was entertainment at its finest. At any rate, we're throwing rocks to bats when we see what we at first thought was a monstrous bat flying higher in the sky than the others. I don't remember who spotted it first, but once it was pointed out, we were stunned. After staring at it for a few seconds, it was clear that this wasn't a bat. It was something else. It was a creature in the shape of a man, but with wings. It had wings exactly like that of a bat, but it had distinct arms and legs, also. It was mostly gliding, with only the occasional flap of its wings, which is unlike a bat, which constantly flaps its wings, and its arms were sort of lazily hanging behind it at its side. It looked tall, but lanky, but it was too high in the sky to really get a good estimate of size. I know today that it's pretty easy to get size estimates really wrong on objects that are flying, like large birds. I also can say that it was dark, but I couldn't tell you anything about coloration. It was dusk, and the light was relatively low by that point, and we were seeing it mostly as a silhouette. We saw a head, but never a face. I don't think it was looking down. My best estimate is that it was about 2 to 2.5 times as high as the bats, so that would probably put it at around 100 feet off the ground, but I could easily be way off. It wasn't a detail that I focused on at the time. We watched this creature for a little while, maybe 15 seconds or so. We were transfixed, standing there with slack jaws, trying to comprehend what we were seeing. Then we snapped out of it, we looked at each other, and simultaneously we ran toward the house to get my dad. I remember my dad was home, but my mom wasn't. We ran inside and told him to come outside quick. We told him that we had seen the devil. Of course we thought it was the devil. That's how we would have contextualized it within our very limited framework at the time. He told us that he was sure that we hadn't seen the devil, but he reluctantly decided to come outside and check. By the time he did, whatever it was had gone. He reassured us with some platitudes, but he obviously didn't believe us. We were all pretty shaken by the sighting, and we talked about it for weeks afterwards. I slept in the bed with my parents that night, and for at least a week afterwards. This incident actually spurred my interest in the supernatural. Later, as a teenager, I learned about the Mothman sightings, and wondered if that had been what we had witnessed. With the West Virginia connection, it was natural to think it may have been. But the descriptions never really fit perfectly, and we weren't very close to Point Pleasant. It wasn't until the reports started appearing in your newsletter that it became clear that others had been seeing exactly what I had seen. The Jeepers Creepers description really is the most apt description that I've seen. I'm a scientist, or was, anyway, so I have trouble reconciling what we saw with reality as I know it, but I am sure that we saw something. Not really much to tell beyond that. My brother passed away many years ago, and I haven't spoken to Roy in probably as long. He's had some struggles with substance abuse as an adult, and I've kept my distance. None of us discussed the incident since we were adults, though we did discuss it at some point in our teens. I wanted to share just to give you an additional data point in your investigation. I expect that we'll never really know what people are seeing, but it's good that someone is documenting it for posterity, if for nothing else. Thanks, RD.
The Fayetteville Mothman. Our family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and our home was located 1/10 mile from the major town street. Our house was located in the forest, and our property bordered a state forest. I was 11 or 12 at the time. The forest was dense with well-worn hiking paths. Some had been logging roads at one time. One was larger as it had once been a rock quarry road. The remains of the quarry was located on our property. A quarter mile from the quarry was a convergence to two creeks. One was Wolf Creek. The convergence point once had a 5-foot stone dam that was blasted years before my time due to waterborne disease outbreaks. The town dumped its sewage into the smaller creek. Beyond the convergence of the creek it descended several large waterfall systems into the new River George. When waters were low, a large flat rock creek bed was exposed, and we played in it as kids. Several of us were wrapped up in the Dungeons and Dragons craze, were enamored by heavy metal music, and teetered on the edge of occult interests. Nothing too serious. Boys of their time and place. During one late afternoon I proclaimed upon the top of a rock outcrop over the creek bed that I was calling forward a great spirit of the deep forest. Nothing happened. We continued playing until dusk, parted ways and returned home. Perhaps it was happenstance. Perhaps related. My experience with Mothman began that week and lasted just less than a month. I did not speak of it or share with others for nearly 15 years. I was afraid that speaking of it would somehow cause it to come back around. I will spare you the minor details, but need to share the only backstory that matters. A few years earlier I played with a girl my age and her younger brother. They had a grand 3-story wooden home in our neighborhood. It was a historic house. A mansion by local standards. We entered her home one night, after searching out fireflies in the front yard. When we walked through the foyer to the main staircase to the second floor, I looked to my right across a large sitting room, where there were sets of large windows. Outside the windows was a large hardwood about 75 years old. I saw 2 large red eyes. Large. I stopped. The girl and her brother were already a fourth the way up the stairs, and I was standing still and mesmerized. I said, "There are 2 red eyes in your tree." The girl replied back, "That's a ghost. He has red eyes, looks like an old man, sits in the tree and stares at us sometimes." I asked if they ever called the police. She said no. She said her mom told them not to look at it and ignore it. Their mom often seemed drained and depressed. I was glad I did not have old creepy men sitting in trees around our house. It stayed with me. Back to my main story. I immediately felt that I was being watched at all times. The primal feeling of prey being stalked. It did not matter if I was in my house, woods, walking to the park, day and night. There were scratches at my second floor window but no trees. Deep fear of getting out of bed. Paralyzing fear. Many sleepless nights. I tried to share strange things were going on to my parents. They had no interest. I would wake them up at night and ask them to search the house, check the doors, etc. They were annoyed. They did agree to keep the floodlights on surrounding the house. My dog was acting strange. Normally a brave dog not scared by bear, not man, nor bigger dog, was a mess while this was going on. I called one of my friends that was there with us when we were playing and asked him to come over. That it was very important. Told him I would only speak with him in person about it. He did, and I learned he too was having a series of strange and frightening events. He felt we needed to stick together and tell no one, as they would think we were nuts. Needless to say, I did spend a lot of time at his house, located in a non-wooded neighborhood. The stuff going on at his house was just as bad. Knocking on multiple walls during the day. 1,000 birds on the power lines outside his home. The fear of being watched and followed. He was irritated with me as he felt it had been my fault. One night I mustered the courage to go to my bedroom window and look out on the backyard. A beam crossed from the shadows of the house side across the yard and into the floodlight lit area just a bit, stopped and looked over its shoulder at me at an upward angle as I was in an elevated position. First, this thing was 8 to 9 feet tall. Had its giant wings pulled in across its back so that it looked like a cloak. It looked straight ahead again and seemed to glide across the yard in a standing position. It did not have traditional legs, and the legs came together into a very strange point, as though its stance could not support its mass, yet they did. It used no stride. It was not human. Many years later, when the film came out, I was amazed. The static on the phone, headaches, etc. At the time of the events, I assumed it was a demon. Mothman was not a term I knew. I never saw it spread its wings or fly. I did have the feeling it was above me. A bird's eye view. The damn thing was silent as I have the hearing of a fruit bat. I had a panic attack that night, cold sweats, and felt very alone. I got down on my knees and prayed in a way I never had and never have since. There was one wise old man who cut our grass and acted as a handyman when the mines closed from time to time. He liked me, gave me a lot of advice, told me stories. He had 3 girls and no boys. My dad liked to do his own work but pitched the fella work because he was a good guy. He was working on our mower when I broached the subject briefly. He stopped what he was doing, stood up, took me by the shoulders, and looked me in the eyes. He said, "I know what you are talking about. It is the thing we do not talk about in this town. It is called Mothman, and even talking about it can bring him around." That was it. I live in Atlanta now, and during 2005 I finally shared the whole story with my wife of 6 years. Within a week I was in the back courtyard and one swooped. The wingspan and speed was awesome. It perched, not like a bird, 70 yards away at about 70 feet and watched me. No red eyes during the middle of the day and blended well. They do not weigh much, but are crazy large, intelligent and not human. It moved on within a week. Well, they can communicate telepathically, so can I when you lock minds with it. I let it know that it was out of its element in a city like Atlanta, that I had no fear, and that I would end it should it mess with my family and property. Not sure I could. But I was a man at that time, and had very little patience and refused to succumb to fear. They are most curious about us. They don't think like humans. Don't have the same values and motivations. There were no tragedies associated with my experience. They are voyeurs by nature. I don't think they are physically as strong as a full man. But I can't imagine getting a shot at one. MJ.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.